Hello everyone, my name is Angelica and welcome to my channel. Happy New Year! I hope you had lovely time during Christmas and the New Year. For my first video this year, I prepare for you 24 DIY projects to elevate your home, from minimalist masterpieces to boho-inspired wonders and everything in between. So there's something for everyone. So click that subscribe button, grab your craft supplies and let's get right into the first project. This is quite a unique shape of lampshade. If you find exactly the same one, that's bonus, but you can always create this project by connecting two separate same size lampshades together. I start with removing the old fabric and give it a good clean. I take 2mm thick macrame cord and start my design. I tie one of its ends to the metal part. Because the reel with the cord is too big to go through the gaps in my lampshade, I have to cut off few meters of it and work like this. I start my design with the top part of the lampshade. Overall, the design is very easy and repetitive. All I do is wrapping my cord around the top and middle wire. I pull the cord each time, making sure it's nice and tight. Once it's about 1 cm away from the metal part, I cut the macrame cord off. I take a jute yarn and tie it to the macrame cord. Then I continue the design the same way. I always count how many times I've already wrapped the jute yarn around, so each part looks exactly the same. I cut this yarn off and again add the macrame cord to it. This project is inspired by bonbon lampshade, which are super expensive. You can choose as many colors as you like and even try different patterns. The top section is done and now I'm going to repeat the process with the bottom section. Each time I wrap it around the middle part of the lampshade, I have to put new cord between two previous ones. The middle section should form an alternating sequence of cords from the top and bottom section. Once I reach the end, I tie the end of the yarn to the metal part. I cut off any excess cord and spread all the cords evenly. I was looking for glass vase which is round and straight, and then I found this storage container which is perfect. It's slightly shorter than a spaghetti jar. For this project I've decided to use polymer clay. I take small piece at the time and roll it out flat to the same thickness. Polymer clay is much harder than air dry clay, so it takes a bit longer to make it flat. You can easily use air dry clay for this project and it will work as good. I take my round cutter and create one big circle. I measure its center and then cut it in half. To smooth any imperfection or uneven edges with polymer clay, you have to just tap and rub it slightly. Water won't help in this case. Altogether, I've created 6 circles which I divided in half. You can see that I've used different color of clay. First of all, I will spray paint it anyway. Secondly, the white clay I was using was Fimo Professional, which is much harder than the soft version. I found hard to work with it, so I swapped it for the other one. I placed them flat on the baking tray and baked them for 30 minutes at 110 Celsius degrees. After baking and cooling down, it was time to attach them to the vase. But before that, I've decided to sand down the straight side of each piece. It will just make it nice, even and easier to glue to the glass. To attach the clay pieces to the glass, I'm using super glue. I spread it along the straight side and then move it onto the jar. Hold it for a few seconds, making sure the glue starts working. At first, I glue 4 pieces at the same height and the same distance between each other. Then I glue 2 pieces slightly lower than the previous ones and I repeat it all around the vase. I gave it 2 coats of white spray paint. You can always just use paint and brush, but because of the sticking out parts, I thought spray will be better and quicker choice. To create the splash paint effect, I'm using brown paint and a wooden stick with pointy end. In here, you can also use toothbrush and create the real splash effect. I simply create irregular dots around the vase. I will be using smaller canvas, and this time I'm using new one, but that's only because it's something what I already had around. This time, to create the texture, I will be using air dry clay. For this size canvas, I take the whole piece of it and I start kneading it together. I take rolling pin and start rolling it out flat. As this piece of clay is quite big, you need to use some pressure to be able to roll it. I roll it out very thin. It's thin but still keeps its shape and doesn't tear. I remove it gently from the table and place it on the front of the canvas. And straight away I start creating the design. You have to be very gentle with it and also careful to not stick the pieces together, as it might be really hard to separate it. I wrap it around the canvas edges and cut off the excess. Make sure it sticks to the edges very well. Using damp sponge, I smooth out all the edges and the whole clay surface. The harder part of the sponge is good for getting rid of any imperfection, and the other side is better for smoothing everything out. Once I'm happy with the look, I leave it to dry. As it's quite a big piece, I leave it for 48 hours. Again, if you want, you can paint it in different color or even apply Mod Podge for glossy finish. I've picked up this ceramic vase which I bought in thrift store. Of course, the size and shape doesn't matter, so you can choose whichever vase you like. Because my vase is glazed and plaster might not stick that well to it, I will be also using this joint tape. I wrap the most part of my vase with it. Plastering tape will also prevent the cracks on the plaster of Paris. It's really easy to tape it as one side is sticky. It don't have to be done perfectly as it will be all covered anyway. Only make sure that the tape sticks well to the surface. I live by the sea, so for me it was easy to gather this collection. I've got in here some sea glass in different colors, cheap pieces of old tiles, small stones and selection of few different shells. You might be able to buy similar stuff in craft store, or next time when you go on your holidays, remember to bring few beach souvenirs with you. I take plastic container and start mixing the plaster powder with water. The ideal ratio for plaster of Paris is 2 parts of plaster to part of water, but I suggest to follow instructions from your plaster's brand. In this case, I want to create quite thicker consistency than usual. I don't want it to be too watery because it will start running down on the vase. I also make small patch at the time as this plaster sets so quickly and I won't have enough time to attach the small bits to it. Make sure there is no lumps and you can start moving plaster onto the vase. You can use some kind of spatula. I'm using my hand for more organic look. And as I said before, I apply plaster only on the small part of vase at the time. And then I start attaching my sea glass, tiles and shells on the wet plaster. Press each piece slightly down, making sure it sticks and won't come off later. I place all the bits in a random irregular design. If there is some part with visible tape, I simply add more plaster. And I carry on with this process all around the vase, putting small amount of plaster at a time. I also put extra plaster at the top to make this vase look like it's fully made out of plaster. To create eucalyptus stems, I will be using felt fabric in this lovely green color. I start with creating circles. They don't have to be perfectly round, that's why I'm doing it by hand. I cut the first round shape out, which later we'll use as a template. I place it on top of the fabric and just cut around it. For each eucalyptus stalk, I will be using 3 different sizes of circle. I start with the smallest one, which is about 2 cm in diameter. I fold it in half and attach to the top of metal wire. I've started with super glue. I've put small drop of it on the bottom of the folded line and then glue it to the wire. The problem with super glue is that it's soaking through the fabric, making it very messy and also sticky to your fingers. So I quickly swap it for hot glue. 1 leaf at the top, then going lower, 2 leaves, 1 on each side, but slightly lower than the previous one. And then each row is about 1 cm apart. I continue with this pattern almost all the way down. And once they are all attached, I unravel each leaf so it directs more to the sides rather than upwards. It was super easy and quick way of doing them. I'm really happy with the result as they look very realistic. This project has two functions. It makes cool and unique home decoration, like also entertaining people. To create my tic-tac-toe board, I'm using air dry clay. I take quite big piece of it and straight away I roll it out flat. I make sure the whole piece has the same thickness. I take a ruler and create first straight cut. The board will be square, so I have to make sure each edge is the same length and also has straight corners. Once it's nicely cut, I remove the excess clay and start making the edges. I move the clay onto baking paper so it will be easier to move it and it won't stick to it as much as it would to my worktop. For each edge I make thin roll. To make them stick better, I create small cuts all around the edge of my square. And as a glue, I'm using clay slip. I press it slightly down to make it more square than round. And the same way I attach other three pieces. To get rid of the gap between two parts, I press them together with my wooden knife and then smooth it out. Slightly damp sponge also helps with smoothing the surface down and getting rid of any imperfections. Now it's time to divide one big square into 9 smaller ones. I make roll pieces which are thinner than the edge and attach them onto a bigger square. I press them down and then fill all the gaps with clay slip. Before I leave it to dry, I smooth it all out. Now it's time to create knots and crosses. To cut the circle shape out, I'm using cookie cutter, which size will easily fit into my board, and then smaller cutter for the whole inside. And because I don't have cross-shape cutter, I made the template out of cardboard. And like in my first project, I placed the template flat on the clay and traced the lines around it. I smoothed it all out and leave it till fully dry. Choose your favorite colors and paint it. Use different color for knots and crosses for more outstanding finish. To create a new top for my stool, I start with taking the measurements. This project can be done on any size and shape of stool. My top measures 31 × 31 centimeters. I draw the sketch on a piece of paper to understand how much of the fabric I will need. I've decided to divide this square into 7 equal long sections, but this will depend on your own preferences, how thick you want the tubes to be. 31 centimeters divided by 7 tells me how thick each pipe has to be. To create the cushion top for my stool, I will be using this IKEA fleece blanket. And to make each tube nice and cushiony, I will stuff them with the pillow fillet. I place the fabric flat and measure the piece I have to cut out. As I measured before, each pipe is going to be about 4.4 centimeters wide. So I doubled this number and added few extra centimeters for the sewing part, which came out to 11 centimeters altogether. When it comes to the length, I have to cut each piece about 50 centimeters long. 30 centimeters just to cover the top and extra centimeters to be able to wrap it around the stool. I double check with the stool if that's enough of the fabric and then cut 14 pieces of them. To create the pipe shape, I will be sewing two long edges together. I fold the fabric in half and using simple stitch I always sew them. If you have and know how to use sewing machine, you can make this process so much easier and quicker. I take one end of the fabric and turn it inside out. I want the stitches to be inside of the pipe. Once this is done, I take the pillow filler and start filling the pipe up, small sections at a time. I make sure I spread it evenly throughout the whole length. Using sander, I sand down the wooden part of the stool, giving it more modern look. I place the rest of the fabric flat on the floor and put the stool upside down on it. I want to cover the red leather look. I make it slightly bigger than the stool and using staple gun I staple it to the bottom of my stool. I make sure it covers nicely the whole surface. I've placed 7 pipes next to the stool with the stitches facing down. And using again the same gun, I attach one by one to the bottom of the stool. With my other 7 pipes, I attach them to the stool the same way to the adjacent edge. I pull 7 pipes over the top part of the stool. Then I take one pipe from the other edge and go alternately above and under the other pipes. Once I've reached the other edge, I staple it, and I repeat the process with all the pipes. I will be using white 40 x 50 cm canvas. I start with drawing the design with the pencil. For the first one, I'm going with one big flower. For me, it's easier to first draw the design, which I will follow later on. This time, to create the texture, I've decided to use Plaster of Paris. I used to use all-purpose filler, but I think Plaster has much smoother consistency. You can follow the instruction from the packaging. I do it by eye. And instead of painting it later, I'm adding the acrylic paint now to the water and plaster mixture. More you add, then more intense the final result will be. Remember that Plaster of Paris dries out quite quick, so I recommend doing small patches at a time. The consistency can't be too runny, but also not too thick, as it will make it harder to work with. I take plastic bag and move my plaster to the inside. I cut the corner off. And now, like decorating the cake with the icing, I cover the lines I've made, creating the edges of petals. Then, using paintbrush, I spread it to the inside. By keeping the edge high, I make more of the 3D effect. With thinner brush, I make small lines to give the petal more realistic look. I want the whole petal to be covered, so with the bigger ones, I have to add extra plaster in the middle. With really big petals, you can make the edge thicker by applying more of the plaster. I sometimes dip the brush in the water and smooth out the surface. If some places were not covered very well with the first go, you can always allow it to dry and then apply another coat. But creating all the texture and design on each petal is much easier to do when the plaster is still wet. As the middle part is so small, it was easier just to paint it instead of making new part of plaster. This is so easy but very stylish project. To create modern looking candle holder, I will be using this glass dish as my base. As you can see, it cost me only 50p from charity shop. I will also need copper pipe parts. I believe it's a bead which you use to connect two copper pipes together. They are also super affordable, about 50p per piece. For this size of the dish, I will use 3 of them. I make sure the candle fits inside the hole. You can also just cut pipe to shorter pieces, but this will require you to have pipe cutters, so I think finding ready parts is just easier. The gluing surface on the pipe is very small and thin, that's why it's important to use strong glue. I'm using super glue. I put a generous amount around the pipe edge, trying not to overspread on the outside of the pipe. I press it down and hold for a few seconds, giving the glue time to cure. I take it outside and give it a spray with primer. And as a main color, I'm going with black, which is timeless color and fits perfectly with modern decor. Super quick and easy decor project. Candles are always a good choice when it comes to decorating, so having a nice display for them is always a bonus. This will really work on any kind of glass vase, but probably most effective on tall container. Thickness of the core will depend on the size of the vase you are using. I start with gluing its end to the inside of the glass. To cover the whole container, I will use one continued piece of rope. With the design, there is not any rule. I just create irregular turns all around the vase. I focus on sections. I try cover the whole height of one section and then move forward. I try to be very gentle with the glue. I put small and thin lines. But I also have to be very quick with adding the rope, as such thin line of the hot glue dries out so quick. This is a great way of adding more texture and interest to basic glass vase. There is nothing bad with plain vase, but this rope makes it more decorative. I finish it the same way as I started. Cut longer piece and glue it to the inside of the vase. With any excess glue, you can take a knife and gently cut it out. Decided to turn my old candle jar into a new one, something more eye-catching. I take air dry clay and roll it out flat. Try to roll it to the same thickness, about half centimeter. I move it onto my glass. The bottom part can be almost straight with the glass. For the top, make sure you have some extra clay. I won't cover the bottom part of the glass. I only wrap it around so it stays secured in one place. Top part I also wrap around. Remember that air dry clay shrinks when drying, so don't wrap it too tight. Make it slightly loose around the glass. Leave about 2 cm of the clay inside the glass and the rest you can cut off. I've rolled out another piece of clay and added it to the rest. I cut out the excess and then connect the ends together. With water, I smooth out the edge. To create the pattern, I'm using end of Sharpie, but it can be any object with round end. I dip it in the water so it doesn't stick to the clay when I'm pressing. I try to make irregular pattern all around the container. Before I leave it to dry, I gently smooth it out with water. Because few small cracks appeared after drying, I've decided to paint it. I'm using very similar color to the clay, mixed with baking soda. Thicker consistency of this paint will nicely fill all the imperfections. I glue 2 candle wicks and pour the wax. As this new project will cover the whole surface on canvas, I decided to use thrifted one, which was much cheaper than buying new one. Ideally, use a rectangle shape in the size you prefer. I will also need a jute rope. I'm using 4mm thick one, but it will work with any size. Smaller you choose, more times you have to go around with it. To create a unique pattern, I have to wrap the cord around the canvas in sections. I start with gluing cord's end to the back and wrap it around its wider side. Ideally, you want each section to be the same size. If I would do it again, at first I would take the measurements of the canvas and then divide it by the amount of sections I want. I make sure the rope is tightened as I don't glue it every time. I pulled all pieces very close to each other not to see the canvas picture underneath. Once I got closer to the edge, I glued the rope to the canvas edge, just to make it more secure. First section is done. Now I move to the opposite side. Glue the end at the back. You can start wrapping from the outside of the edge to the inside. I don't really know why I started this way. Two sections are done, one vertically and one horizontally. Now I'm going to repeat the process, starting with the longer side and then the shorter. This time I wrap it around the already existed rope. The place of meeting two sections make the unique pattern. This way I cover the entire canvas, wrap its width, then height, and so on. If you want to save on the jute rope, you can always cut the pieces and just glue them to the canvas edge. This way you will save almost half of the rope, but it will take you much longer time. For me, jute is very boho. Its color and texture add unique look to your space. To create the candle holder, I will be using polystyrene ring. You can find them in craft stores. They are often used for making wreaths. You can also find them in different sizes. I wasn't sure which kind of knife would be the best for cutting this type of material. I started with just a normal one, but quickly swapped it for shredded knife. I do gentle moves in one direction. I cut slightly more than half of the ring. To be able to place it up, I cut the bottom straight. This will be a holder for taper candles. I have to make big and deep enough openings for them. I'm going with grey acrylic paint. I will need few basic layers before I can move to the next step. next step is to create the texture. I mix slightly darker shade of grey with baking soda. When the paint is still wet, I dip my brush in coffee grounds. Mine are too wet, but at the end it worked fine. The easiest option is to buy Stone Effect spray paint and apply it. To save some money, I try to recreate this effect by myself. With thin wooden stick, I make irregular pattern of dots. I'm using light and black color paint. Remember that this candle holder is for decorative use only. Don't light up the candle. You can use LED flameless candles instead. These pillar bowls, created usually out of two separate bowls, are so popular right now. I wanted to have my own one as well, but with a little twist. I will create the pillars out of this thick cardboard roll. You can use toilet paper roll, but ideally you want something stronger. You can make 4 or 3 pillars. I'm going with just 3 as this roll is not long enough to make 4. You have to make sure all 3 are the same height, otherwise the bowl won't stand straight. I take small handsaw and cut the roll following the lines I've created. I try to spread them evenly on the bottom and put them on the flat part of the bowl. Before gluing, you can give them a quick sanding. To glue them, I'm using Gorilla Glue. I put it all around the rim. Once I press it down, the excess glue comes out from the sides. I quickly remove it with the tissue. And the same way I glue other 2 parts. You can put some weight on it when the glue is drying. And if there's any excess glue afterwards, you can gently cut it out with knife. I move it outside and spray paint it in white color. As I could see slightly the gaps between legs and bowl, I cover it all with extra layer of paint mixed with baking soda. To create the candle holder, I roll out another piece of clay, this time longer than wider. But of course I try to roll it to the same thickness all along. To make straight cut, I use the ruler and create the strap, about 30 cm long and 4 cm wide. All edges are nice and straight. I smooth the surface out with damp sponge. I lift up the one end and create like a little hill. I take the candle and measure how much space I will need for it. And from that point I lift it up again, creating even bigger hill. As the clay is quite thick, it stays nicely in place. But you can always create some kind of support to keep it in place, like for example rolled kitchen foil. Remember, you can always sand down any imperfections once the clay is dry, but it's always good to give it the best finish before leaving to dry. Now it's time to create something what will hold the candle in place. I make small ball out of the clay and push the candle in it. I make it quite high so it will hold the weight of the candle once it's dry. I make it straight and remove the candle, but before I remove it I make it slightly wider as clay shrinks when drying and I want to make sure my candle will still fit into it. I create few small cuts and with the pressure I glue two parts together. Last, fixing and smoothing before I leave it to dry. After drying, candle still fits to the holder and stays secured in place. For this decoration I'm going with old and well-known technique with baking soda. I add few teaspoons of baking soda to my paint and then cover my whole decoration with this. This is very easy project to make, but it creates really nice decoration. I start with rolling out flat piece of clay, about 1.5 centimeters thick. I take round object to be able to create the perfect arch. I place it on the top of the clay and mark half of it circled. Coming from the ends, I make two straight lines. Again, you can make it as big or as small as you like. You can always find the container first and then adjust the size of the clay to it. I will need two identical pieces, so I roll out another piece of clay. There is a clever trick if you want your piece to have the same thickness on the whole surface. Put it between two pieces of dowel and then start rolling. It is a good idea. I don't do it too often as usually I don't need such a thick piece. However, if I will find thinner dowels, I will definitely follow this trick. To make two same size pieces, I simply move one onto another one and follow the edge around. Be gentle when moving the clay as it can stretch easily and lose its original shape. Before I leave them to dry, I smooth out the edges and whole surface. When drying, I recommend turning them from time to time or even put something on them for a while. This way, you will ensure that they stay flat. Once they dry, choose your favorite color and paint them. You can add more details just to the front, but overall I would paint all the sides. As I said before, you can first find the vase and then adjust the clay size to it. If not, find the item later on, which will be anyway nicely covered and invisible behind the clay. Ideally, it would be a square item as it has bigger surface to stick to the clay, but with the right glue, a round shape will also work great. To create wall pocket, I take big piece of clay and roll it out flat to the same thickness. I start with the back part. You can make it as big or as small as you want. The process will look the same. I make sure the edges are straight. Then I roll out another piece which is slightly wider than the first one, but it's about 2/3 of the first one height. To connect two parts together, I'm making small cuts along the edge. To make the front piece convex, I stuff it with few tissues and then press all the edges together. Using tool from the clay tool kit, I blend it together. For extra detail, I pull the knife handle along the edges. Before I leave it to dry, I smooth out all the imperfections. It's a wall pocket, so to be able to hang it on the wall, I create the hole. Try to make it exactly in the middle. Once it's dry, I can remove the tissues. I always like to give gentle sanding to the projects. It gives better finish and better for the paint to stick to it. Paint it in the color you like. I'm going with beige acrylic paint. I've also applied layer of gloss Mod Podge. This way it looks more like a real ceramic. Place dried flowers and hang on your wall. I rarely use polymer clay as it's more expensive and overall I prefer to work with air dry clay. But for this project I think this type of clay will work better. I picked up two different colors, brown and white. I start with first color and I roll it out flat. This is harder to roll, but if you make small moves at the time it eventually goes flat. This time I have square cutter. Each coaster will contain 18 brown and 18 white squares. Once the squares are cut out, I take another piece of clay and roll it out flat. This will be a base. One piece at a time, I move it onto the white flat one. I put them very close to each other. You don't really want to have any gaps between them. Once all 30 pieces are added, I go with my roller a few times over it. It makes two parts stick together better. I want it to be as straight as it can be, so with the help of ruler I cut the edges straight. I've created two of them. Follow the baking instruction from your packaging. I have to bake them for 30 minutes at 110 Celsius degrees. Make sure they are super flat before baking. I start with cutting 3 straps from craft paper. I reuse the paper from my Amazon parcel. I cut about 7 centimeters wide straps. Each of these straps I crease with my hands. I collect them together, tape their ends to the table and braid. Try to keep the same thickness on the whole length. As As a base for my new planter, I will use old plastic bucket. I remove the parts which I don't want and cover its surface with piece of craft paper. Using hot glue, I start attaching my first braid at the bottom of the container. If you prefer, you can make one very long braid and keep wrapping it around. I prefer to have straight rows. Each braid I start gluing from the same line, so only back of the container doesn't got the clean look. I was left with not enough space for one more braid, so I decided to cut off the top part which was sticking out. To cover the white part and give this plant a nicer finish, I wrapped the hemp fabric around it. I glue it into the front, wrap around the edge and glue the excess inside. Then I have enough space to add one more braid. So easy and inexpensive project. Braids add texture to this planter, making it a very interesting piece of decor. My next project will be a wall decor. To create it, I need a canvas. If you know me for longer, you know I like to reuse old canvas. So I found this one in the charity shop for 50p. This project can be done on any size canvas. I start with covering what's on this canvas at the moment. I will need few layers of white paint. To create the letters, I will be using 3mm thick plywood. I measure the size of the canvas, think of the design and adjust the letter size to it. To cut them out, I'm using my X2 laser cutter. I put the right settings and let the machine do the job. If you don't have a laser cutter, as it's of course a big investment, you can buy already letters. You can find them online or in a craft store. They don't have to be wooden. Just make sure they are few millimeters thick. To glue them in straight line, I've decided to use the same piece of plywood as a guide. I put hot glue at the back of the letter and then press it through the hole. You can also just draw lines and use them as your guide. And one by one I attach them all to the canvas. I make sure they all stick and are secured in place. Using same white paint, I cover the letters, not only front of them, but all the sides as well. To create the texture around the letters, I will be using all-purpose filler. It doesn't need to be a thick layer. Random moves in each direction creates the best result. I also try to go between the letters. I don't apply it on actual letters, just around them onto the canvas. Usually, I'm not the biggest fan of any kind of posters with quotes or sayings, but I like this one because it looks sophisticated and minimal. I mix it with the jug as it will be easier later to pour it inside the bottle. The general ratio for plaster of Paris is 2 parts plaster to 1 part water. Once it's nicely mixed, I pour it to the small bottle. Then I take the balloon and I blow it up slightly. Not too big and not too small. I twist the end, put it over the bottle neck, untwist it and start pouring the plaster inside the balloon. I've used all the plaster I made. I made a knot and moved balloon around to spread this mixture evenly on its walls. I do it until I can feel that nothing else is moving. I place it in the bowl to dry, like also to create the flat bottom. Try not to touch it when it's drying. Plaster doesn't take too long to dry. Once I could feel the balloon is very hard, I cut it. The trouble was that it got stuck inside the bowl. At first I thought the project is completely ruined, but with help of silicone spatula I was able to remove it. Project saved. I keep it still inside the bowl and start to create the opening for my vase. I take knife with sharp end and gently tap it. Once I've made small hole, I can now put the knife deeper and sort of cut through the plaster. Of course, I do it very gently. Plaster is a soft material and sometimes used for sculpting, but in here the walls are very thin, so I have to be careful. I gradually make the hole bigger and bigger. And once the hole is big enough, I can remove the balloon and empty it from the plaster dust. I think this is such a unique decoration and a way of making it too. You can also paint it. I leave it the plaster look for a modern finish, used as a sculpture or vase for fall flowers. Next project is perfect for reusing old jars. Usually I don't like the vases made out of the jars because of the top, but this time it will be nicely covered. I have two different heights of jars. I start with spray paint them in white, just to create the base layer. Then I take white acrylic paint and add baking soda to it. I mix it well and with sponge I apply it onto the jars. It creates nice texture effect. To decorate the jars, I will be using raffia in string. I cut one piece which will go on the top part of the jar, and then few longer ones which will go from the top to the bottom. Using laxed knot, I attach them all to the first piece. I try to keep the same distance between each knot and then wrap it around the top part of the jar. I pull two strings and glue the ends to the bottom of the jar. And as I've mentioned before, I wrap long piece of the string on the top part to hide the ugly part of the jar. For the longer jar, I create the braid for the top part. I double up the string so the braid is thicker and covers bigger area. This wall art will look great on a bigger canvas. I'm using A3 size. Mine came frame but with some print on it, so I've painted it few times in white. In the shop I went to, it was cheaper to buy frame print than same size empty canvas. I leave the tape on the frame for now. To create the textured pattern on this canvas, I will be using all-purpose filler mixed with black acrylic paint. I'm using the filler from the tube as I found it to be more flexible and easy to work with. I mix it well till two parts are well combined. To apply the mixture on my canvas, I will use this putty knife with straight end. I take small amount of the mixture on the back of the putty knife and apply it on the canvas. I do irregular pattern and I pull the knife from different directions. I try to keep the rows quite straight. Make sure you take enough plaster to create the texture, not just flat spots. very satisfying project. Not artistic skills needed, but still creates unique and a modern piece of art. I wanted to create the bobbin frame for a while already. I ordered half wooden beads on Amazon. I will leave the link to them down below. I had to measure the width of my frame first to know what bead size I need. To make sure the beads are spread evenly, I put them on the frame first before gluing. You don't want to end up with too big gap at the end, but not enough for one half bead. To glue them, I'm using hot glue. At first I tried super glue, but it didn't work. With the hot glue, I make small drop in the middle and then press hard. This way the glue is nicely spread and there isn't a big gap between the frame and the bead. For the color, I'm going with dark green. I'm using acrylic paint and apply it with the brush. You probably can use spray paint for quicker result. I really like shade of this green. Picasso print inside and it creates such a cool wall decoration. And there you have it, 24 tiny treasures to elevate your space. Let me know in the comment section which project was your favorite and if there is any new technique, craft, DIY projects you are excited to try out this year. Don't forget about the like button and subscribe to my channel for more ideas. Thanks for watching and I'll see you in my next video.